July 29, 1981. St. Paul's Cathedral, London. 750 million people watched on television as Lady Diana Spencer married Prince Charles in what was called the wedding of the century. The fairy tale was complete. The shy kindergarten teacher had become a princess. But what the cameras didn't show was what happened after the ceremony, after the balcony kiss, after the crowds went home. What happened on Diana's wedding night would haunt her for the next 16 years. To understand the tragedy of Diana's wedding night, you need to understand what led to that day. Diana Spencer was 19 years old when Prince Charles proposed. She was young, innocent, desperately in love. Charles was 32, worldly, experienced, and still in love with someone else, Camilla Parker Bowles. But Camilla was married. She wasn't suitable as a future queen. Diana was, young, virginal, from aristocratic blood, perfect on paper. And so the engagement was announced. From the moment the engagement was official, Diana's life changed completely. She moved into Clarence House. She was given etiquette lessons, protocol training, how to wave, how to curtsy, how to smile for cameras. But no one prepared her for the emotional reality of what she was entering. No one told her that Charles was still seeing Camilla. No one warned her that the fairy tale was a lie. The warning signs were there from the beginning. 2 weeks before the wedding, Diana discovered a bracelet. Charles had commissioned it as a gift. 2 intertwined C's. For Charles and Camilla. He gave it to Camilla as a farewell present. Diana found out and confronted him. Charles was dismissive. It's just a goodbye gift. It means nothing. Diana wanted to call off the wedding. She told her sisters, "I can't do this. He doesn't love me." Her sisters told her it was too late. "Your face is on the tea towels. You can't back out now." The night before the wedding, Diana barely slept. She stayed at Clarence House. Charles was at Buckingham Palace. They spoke on the phone briefly. Diana tried to tell him her fears. "I don't think this is right. I don't think you love me." Charles's response was cold. "Diana, we've made a commitment. We have to go through with it. Think of the country. Think of the duty." Diana hung up the phone and cried. She cried for hours. But there was no escape. The wedding was tomorrow. The world was watching. She had to go through with it. The wedding morning was chaos. Makeup artists, hairstylists, dressmakers making final adjustments to the dress. Diana looked at herself in the mirror. The enormous dress, the Spencer tiara, the veil. She looked like a princess from a storybook, but she felt like a prisoner. She turned to her makeup artist and whispered, "I can't breathe." The artist thought she meant the dress was too tight. But Diana meant something deeper. She was suffocating under the weight of expectation. The carriage ride to St. Paul's Cathedral took Diana through streets lined with millions of people. They were cheering, waving flags, crying with joy. They were witnessing a fairy tale. Diana waved and smiled, but later she would say she felt completely numb. Like she was watching herself from outside her body, like this was happening to someone else. The crowd saw a blushing bride. Diana felt like a condemned woman being led to execution. St. Paul's Cathedral was magnificent. 3,000 guests, heads of state, royalty from across Europe, the Archbishop of Canterbury, a choir, an orchestra. Everything was perfect, except the groom's eyes. When Diana walked down that impossibly long aisle, she searched Charles's face for love, for reassurance, for anything that suggested that was right. Charles smiled politely, like she was a distant cousin, not the woman he was about to marry. The ceremony itself was flawless except for one moment that became famous. Diana mixed up Charles's names. She said, "I take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George." His name was Charles Philip Arthur George. She'd gotten them backwards. The congregation gasped. Diana blushed, but she kept going. Charles also made a mistake. He promised to share all his worldly goods, but he said, "all thy goods," instead of "all my goods." 2 mistakes. Some said they were nerves, others said they were omens. The balcony appearance at Buckingham Palace was the moment everyone was waiting for. The newlyweds emerged to thunderous cheers. The crowd chanted, "Kiss her! Kiss her!" Charles looked uncomfortable. Public displays of affection weren't royal protocol, but the crowd insisted. So Charles gave Diana a brief, awkward kiss. The crowd roared. The cameras captured it. It became one of the most famous photographs in history. But look closely at Diana's face. She's not glowing with joy. She looks relieved, like she's survived an ordeal. After the balcony appearance came the wedding breakfast, a formal meal at Buckingham Palace. Diana sat between Charles and Prince Philip. She tried to eat but couldn't. Her stomach was in knots. Charles was polite but distant, making conversation with other guests, ignoring his new bride. Diana felt invisible at her own wedding. Prince Philip noticed Diana wasn't eating. "Are you unwell?" Diana forced a smile. "Just overwhelmed, sir." Philip nodded. "You'll get used to it." But Diana never did get used to it. Then came the moment Diana had been dreading. Time to leave for the honeymoon. Charles and Diana would spend the night at Broadlands, the Mountbatten estate in Hampshire, before flying to Gibraltar and then cruising on the royal yacht Britannia. They changed into travelling clothes. Diana wore a peach suit. Charles wore a blazer. They waved goodbye to the crowds and got into a carriage decorated with "just married" signs. The crowd cheered. The fairy tale continued. But Diana's nightmare was just beginning. The car ride to Broadlands was silent. Diana tried to make conversation. "Wasn't the cathedral beautiful? Wasn't the music lovely?" Charles responded in monosyllables. "Yes." "Fine. Good." Diana felt the distance between them like a physical wall. She touched his hand. Charles didn't respond. He was looking out the window. Thinking about what? About whom? Diana didn't ask. She already knew. When they arrived at Broadlands, staff greeted them. "Congratulations. How wonderful." Charles smiled and thanked them. Diana smiled too, but her smile never reached her eyes. Broadlands was a beautiful estate. Elegant, historic, romantic. The staff had prepared the master bedroom, fresh flowers, champagne, everything for a perfect wedding night. Charles and Diana were left alone. Finally, for the first time as husband and wife. Diana waited for Charles to say something romantic, something loving, something that would make her feel like this marriage was real. Charles loosened his tie and said, "I'm exhausted. I'm going to have a bath." He disappeared into the bathroom and didn't emerge for an hour. Diana sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her travelling suit, still wearing her makeup, wondering what she was supposed to do. Was this normal? Was this what marriage was like? She heard the bathwater running. She heard Charles moving around, but he didn't call for her. He didn't invite her in. He was treating her like a stranger. After an hour, Charles emerged in his pajamas and dressing gown. He looked surprised to see Diana still sitting there. "Aren't you going to get ready for bed?" Diana went to the bathroom. She took off her makeup. She changed into the nightgown she'd carefully selected. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. What happened next on that wedding night, Diana would later describe as the loneliest experience of her life. Charles was perfunctory, mechanical. There was no tenderness, no passion, no love. It was duty, producing an heir. That was the point of royal marriage. Charles fell asleep immediately afterward. Diana lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tears running down her face, trying not to make any sound. She didn't want to wake Charles, didn't want him to know she was crying, didn't want to admit even to herself what a terrible mistake she had made. Diana got out of bed. She walked to the window, looked out at the dark gardens. She thought about running, just leaving, getting in a car and driving away. But where would she go? Back to London, back to her flat. She was married now. This was her life. She was Princess of Wales. She had duties, responsibilities. The whole world had watched her get married. She couldn't just leave on her wedding night. So she stood at the window and cried silently, mourning the life she'd just given up, mourning the love story that was never real. When Diana finally got back into bed, Charles stirred. "Are you all right?" For a moment, Diana thought about telling him the truth. "No, I'm not all right. I'm heartbroken. I've made a terrible mistake." But she couldn't say it, so she said, "I'm fine, just couldn't sleep." Charles grunted and rolled over. Within minutes, he was snoring softly. Diana lay rigid beside him, her husband, the man she'd just vowed to love, honor, and cherish. But all she felt was fear and loneliness and a growing certainty that this marriage would destroy her. The next morning, staff brought breakfast. Charles read the newspapers. All the coverage was glowing. The dress, the ceremony, the kiss, the fairy tale. Charles seemed pleased. "Look, Diana." They loved it. Diana forced herself to look at the photos. There she was in her wedding dress, smiling, radiant, a stranger. Charles noticed Diana was quiet, still tired from yesterday. Diana nodded. Yes, tired. It was easier than the truth, that she'd spent her wedding night crying, that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, that she wanted to disappear. The honeymoon continued. Gibraltar, the royal yacht Britannia, a Mediterranean cruise, Egypt. Officially, it was romantic. Photos showed the happy couple swimming, dining, exploring. But Diana later revealed the truth. Charles brought books about Camilla on the honeymoon. He wore cufflinks with intertwined C's. Camilla's photos fell out of his diary. He was obsessed with calling her, making sure she was all right. Meanwhile, his new bride was falling apart. Diana tried to make the honeymoon work. She swam. She smiled for photos. She did everything expected of her. But at night, alone with Charles, she felt invisible. He was polite but distant. They had separate cabins on Britannia. Charles said it was because he needed space to work, but Diana knew the truth. He didn't want to be near her. She was an obligation, a duty he'd fulfilled. Now he just wanted to get back to his real life, back to Camilla. By the end of the honeymoon, Diana had lost weight. She was barely eating. The beginning stages of bulimia that would plague her for years. She was having panic attacks, crying in private. But in public, she was perfect, smiling, waving, playing the role of happy newlywed. The disconnect between her public image and private reality was already forming. The mask she would wear for the next 16 years. When they returned to London, Diana's real education began. She moved into Kensington Palace, Charles's home, his territory, his rules. The staff were loyal to him. The schedule revolved around him. Diana was expected to adapt, to fit into his life, to cause no disruption. She tried. She really tried. But she was 20 years old. She was lonely, she was scared, and she was pregnant. 6 weeks after the wedding, Diana discovered she was expecting William. Charles was pleased. He'd done his duty, produced an heir. Now he could get back to his life. Diana's pregnancy was difficult. The bulimia worsened. She was throwing up multiple times a day. She was dizzy, weak, but she had to continue royal duties, smiling for cameras while dying inside. The palace doctors dismissed her complaints. She's just hormonal. She'll be fine once the baby comes. But Diana knew she wasn't fine. She was drowning, and no one was helping her. Looking back, Diana would identify her wedding night as the moment she knew the truth. This marriage was a sham. Charles didn't love her. He never would. She was a broodmare, a pretty face for photos, a womb to produce heirs, but she wasn't a wife, wasn't a partner, wasn't loved. That realization on her wedding night was devastating. Some brides spend their wedding night in blissful romance. Diana spent hers in tears, understanding that her life had just become a prison. But here's what makes Diana's story so powerful. She didn't give up. Yes, her wedding night was traumatic. Yes, the early years of marriage were hell. But Diana fought. She learned. She grew stronger. She used her position to help others. She became the people's princess, not despite her suffering, but because of it. She understood pain, loneliness, feeling trapped, and she channeled that understanding into compassion for others. Years later, when Diana gave her Panorama interview, she spoke about her wedding. I walked down that aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral thinking I was the luckiest girl in the world. By the end of the day, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, but I was trapped. The whole world had watched. I couldn't admit failure, so I smiled and pretended. For years I pretended, until I couldn't anymore. Her honesty shocked the world, but for Diana, it was liberation. Finally telling the truth about the fairy tale that never was. The tragedy of Diana's wedding night isn't just personal, it's systemic. She was 19 years old, barely an adult, marrying a man who didn't love her, because the system required it, because the monarchy needed an heir, because fairy tales sell newspapers and boost tourism. Diana's feelings, Diana's well-being, Diana's future, none of that mattered compared to the institution. She was sacrificed to maintain tradition. And her wedding night, which should have been joyful, became the first night of a 16-year nightmare. Today, royal weddings are different. When William married Kate, they dated for years. They knew each other, loved each other. The wedding was genuine. When Harry married Meghan, he chose love over duty. They left the royal family rather than repeat his mother's mistake. Diana's suffering taught her sons important lessons. Don't marry for duty. Don't sacrifice happiness for protocol. Don't let the institution destroy your life. In 2021, on what would have been Diana's 60th birthday, William and Harry commissioned a statue of their mother. It stands in the gardens of Kensington Palace. Diana is surrounded by children, smiling, confident, free. It's how they want her remembered, not as the tragic bride who cried on her wedding night, but as the strong woman she became, the woman who turned her pain into purpose, who helped millions despite her own suffering, who showed that even in a loveless marriage, you can find meaning. But we shouldn't forget that wedding night, because it matters. It shows the human cost of maintaining fairy tales, the price Diana paid for being young, beautiful, and suitable. She gave up her freedom, her happiness, potentially her life, to maintain an illusion. And on July 29, 1981, while millions celebrated a royal wedding, Diana wept alone, knowing she'd just signed away her future, knowing the prince didn't love her, knowing the fairy tale was a lie. Here's the detail that breaks your heart. In the wedding photos, there's one moment that's different from the rest. Diana is in the carriage returning from St. Paul's. She's waving to the crowds, but if you look closely, really closely at her eyes, you can see something. Not joy, not excitement, fear, pure fear. She knows what's coming. She knows she's made a mistake, but it's too late. The whole world is watching. She has to smile. She has to wave. She has to play her part, even though inside she's screaming. From Diana's diary, written weeks after the wedding. I thought marriage would be the beginning of my life. Instead, it's the end of everything I was. I'm not Diana anymore. I'm Charles's wife, the Princess of Wales, a public figure, a royal asset. But I'm not a person, not really. On my wedding night, I lay awake wondering if I'd ever be happy again. I still don't know the answer, but I'm learning to survive. And maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is all I can hope for now. The final image in our story isn't from the wedding. It's from years later. Diana visiting a women's shelter, talking to women who've escaped abusive relationships. One woman asks, "How did you survive?" Diana doesn't give a platitudes answer. She says honestly, "Some days I barely did, but I found reasons. My sons, my work, the people I could help. And I realized that even in the worst situations, even in the loneliest moments, you can find meaning. You can survive. And sometimes, survival is victory." The woman nods. She understands. So do millions of others who've felt trapped, who've made mistakes, who've survived their own wedding nights. Diana spoke for all of them.